Helman stood by his cart and examined his goods. What did he have in stock? There was a farmer. No, that wouldn't do. An old widow. Certainly not. Blacksmith? Perhaps. Doctor? Yes, the doctor would be perfect. Helman grabbed his axe from the side of the cart. He balanced the doctor's head on the edge of a wheel and swung. Off popped the top of the doctor's skull and exposed the good stuff. Helman knew if he was going to make it to the animal graveyard in time, he would need his brothers to be on form. Some particularly quick-witted brains should do the trick. Helman was good at zombies. He could practically write the book on zombie raising and maintenance. What most necromancers didn't realise was that zombies are essentially a blank canvas. You can fill a zombie with supernatural vigour using the Van Hels's Dance Macabre spell, but that will only last until the next shift in the Winds of Magic. On the other hand, fill a zombie with a personality or a particular trait, and it will keep on going for days. Brains infused with a little magic are better than any spell. As Helman sat, idly whipping his brothers on the journey to the Dire Forest, he felt that he now had a little more colour in his cheeks. He was awash with the post-magical glow that one gets when one has been particularly successful in raising up zombies. Filled with the vigour of the doctor's brain, Bellman, Tellman, Fellman, and Derek were making good progress. Helman estimated that they would reach the edge of the forest in about 4 hours ahead of schedule. He just hoped that the graveyard remained away from the prying eyes of the necromancers and vampires of Sylvania until now. Having made his preparations to ensure that they reached the graveyard in time, Helman decided to rest. Once more, Helman cast his mind back and thought about the time that he had first heard of the animal graveyard. It was Helman's birthday. Norman had suggested that he and Helman ride ahead of Helga in order for the youngest member of the Ghorst family to get used to riding his steed. Helga had agreed and allowed the 2 youngsters to ride on ahead. The 3 riders had been blissfully unaware of the wolf sat atop the nearby outcrop of rocks that had been watching them so intently. When the 2 younger riders had trotted on ahead, the wolf had struck and Helga was flung from her horse. Her scream was only stopped when Helga's neck snapped as she landed. His mother's death cry caught the attention of both Helman and Norman. They turned to see Helga slumped on the ground and her horse being chased up the mountain by the wolf. Helman cried out in horror. The 2 children galloped up the mountain to where the body of Helga Ghorst lay, staring out with her glossy, dead expression. Helman leapt from his horse and collapsed over the slumped body of his mother. Helga was the only person that Helman felt loved him unconditionally. His father and brothers all mocked the sickly Helman, and he never felt part of the Ghorst fraternity. With the loss of his mother, something snapped inside the young boy. "Go," said Helman to the nearby Norman. "I need you to go." Norman saw the mania in Helman's eyes and decided to take Helman's advice. He leapt onto his horse and rode up the mountain in the hope of finding Helga's steed and returning it to the Ghorst family. Helman sat with the body of his mother for 3 hours before realizing it was getting dark. He needed to take Helga home. Come on, mother," said Helman as he lifted Helga's lithe body onto his horse. "Your horse appears to have run away. You can borrow mine." Helman's eye was twitching as he awaited his mother's response. It would never come. As he walked through Tempelhof, Helman wondered why everyone was still up at 2 a.m. Everyone appeared to be gathering in the centre of town, holding their torches and pitchforks. "We're going to divide into 5 groups," called someone from the centre of the gathering. "The first group is going to head up the mountain to find the boy and my wife. The others will each take a different direction and hunt down the beast, and then—" Helman never finished giving his orders, as he spotted the horror-stricken face of his wife staring at him from the back of Helman's horse at the edge of the gathering. As the pandemonium settled, Helman was escorted back to the farm by Derek. Once he had finished drinking the whiskey-infused tea his brother had made him, Helman fell into a fitful sleep. He dreamt of horses, wolves, bats, bones, pitchforks, and his mother. Helman woke from his nightmare with a start. As he lay in bed trying to recall his dream, he heard his brothers talking softly in the kitchen. "I can't believe she's gone," whispered Helman. "I can't believe that our little brother killed our mother," whispered one of the brothers. "Don't be cruel," retorted another. "Well, it's true. Dr. Bain said she could have made it if she'd have gotten help in time. Also, she wouldn't have been up there if it wasn't for that brat and his inability to do anything." Helman, he didn't know what was going to happen. You know that he loved Mum more than anything. It was the wolf that killed her. It frightened her horse and she fell off. "He would die if he heard you talking like that," said Bellman in hushed tones. "At least that Norman kid was able to get back and tell everyone what happened. Dad and the rest of the villagers are out hunting the beast down now." Helman's eye continued to twitch. He didn't quite understand what his brothers were talking about. Helman came out of his bedroom into the kitchen. "Morning!" he cried enthusiastically, and smiled at the older Ghorst children. His brothers looked at Helman in an appalled manner. "What?" asked Helman at his brothers' galling looks. "Do you not remember?" asked Helman in a horrified tone. "Remember what?" asked the young Helman, his eye twitching frantically. "Mum's dead, you monster, and all you could do was sit by idly and watch her die. If you had set off straight away, then there might have been a chance that she'd have made it. It's only thanks to Norman that the rest of the village have now gone after the wolf that frightened Mum's horse. If it wasn't for him, Mum's spirit couldn't be laid to rest properly. Why couldn't you have died at birth, you sickly creep? Mum wouldn't have had to take you out riding today, and she would still be alive." Helman felt the colour drain from his cheeks as he stared at the kitchen table in dumb silence. Minutes turned to hours, and Helman could not bring himself to accept what his brothers had told him. 3 days later, Helman returned to the Ghorst home. The villagers had pursued the wolf and Helga's horse north to the dire forest. It seemed that the wolf had been injured as it pursued the stallion, and, once the wolf had lost the trail, it made its way deep into the forest. Helman explained to his sons that the dying wolf had been found at the edge of a clearing in the woods, which was littered with the bones and bodies of dead forest creatures. There were wolves, bats, and even the remains of hundreds of cats. The villagers had killed the wolf and returned its body to the village from what they had now coined the animal graveyard. The Ghorst family arranged for the wolf to be skinned and its pelt taken to the family mausoleum. As was the tradition in Tempelhof, Helga's body was to be wrapped in the furs of the creature that had brought about her demise. That way, the creature that had caused her ill in life could protect her in death. Helman stood at the door of the family home. Helga's body had been collected from the funeral parlour by Bellman and escorted to the Ghorst home on the back of the family cart. Bellman unharnessed the 2 Ghorst horses and returned them to the stable. Helman's brothers made their way to the front of the cart. Together they lifted it and began to draw their mother's body to the mausoleum. Helman could not bring himself to attend his mother's funeral, and instead watched his brothers slowly draw the cart away into the distance. Helman had always regretted that he did not see his mother put to rest. However, as the Ghorst brothers now drew him into the forest on the same cart used all those years ago, he was thankful for the inspiration his mother's demise had brought to him. Helman made his way east, deeper into the forest. He knew the general direction of the animal graveyard and hoped to come across it shortly. Helman closed his eyes and tried to attune himself to the forest about him. Since the plague that had attracted creatures of undeath to Sylvania, the many magic users had cast spells to ensure Sylvania was purged into a state of perpetual darkness, in order to lessen the effects of the sun's rays on them. The darkness that ensued meant that the once thick vegetation that had covered Sylvania was now dying. As such, despite Helman's best efforts to sense the deathly call of the animal graveyard, he could not sense the dead for the trees. Anger grew in Helman as he opened his eyes and cursed the blackened sky. The anger soon dissipated as he saw that he was surrounded by the bodies of hundreds of animals. He had made it. The animal graveyard, it was still intact. Exultant, Helman leapt from his cart and lay his hands on the head of a decaying wolf. This would do. This would do nicely. Helman quickly pulled out the spell parchment contained in his robe and drew the winds of magic to him. He grasped the 6 tendrils of magic he required and began the invocation of Nehek. Helman cackled as he concluded the spell and watched his work unfold. 1 dire wolf, ah ah ah. 2 dire wolves, ah ah ah. 3 fell bats, ah ah ah. 4. 4? 4. Nothing. Where were the rest of the creatures? Helman realized that the spell had not been enough. He would need to increase its potency and make the most of the graveyard. Helman knew that he would require a more powerful spell. He didn't have the parchment for that, though, as his magic supplier only made a limited amount of them, and he wasn't prepared to pay an extortionate amount for a second-hand supplier. Instead, he retrieved the book he'd given to him by Manfred von Karstein many years ago, and turned to the page relating to the law of undeath, and the Kandoric spell. The Harbinger should be enough. Helman concentrated and drew more magic to him than he had ever done before. He held the 24 tendrils before uttering the words of the spell. Helman released the magic and opened his eyes. He watched as the bodies, bones, and rotting skin of the creatures interred in the graveyard began to come together. Bone fused with bone, flesh knitted itself with more flesh. Decaying vocal cords drew together before letting out a terrible scream, which all but made Helman pass out. Helman recovered himself and looked at the creature before him. Oh, yes, this would do. Helman's spell had created a Terrorgeist of colossal proportions. He would call him Terry. Helman willed the lesser creatures to follow Terry, and commanded the beast to return to Tempelhof. Helman's army was growing, but he decided he needed more. His brothers had got him to the graveyard in sufficient time. He therefore decided to head west to Castle Tempelhof to further expand his army. Helman didn't know the way through the forest, but he felt confident after his recent success. As such, he allowed his brothers to draw him off the path and through the trees. After several hours' travel, Helman's attention was grabbed by a noise up ahead. He looked through the trees and realized he was approaching a village in a clearing. Helman felt a sense of unease about the place, but given his time constraints, he knew he had to pass through the village quickly. He approached and spotted a number of peasant farmers patrolling the perimeter, with Warbosstae emblazoned on their clothing. There were also a number of zombies staggering about the edge of the village. A wall of garbage surrounded the town. Helman made out the words "Mini Warrior" etched into the makeshift defences. Helman passed through the gate and was unnerved to see a young man smile at him as though he knew him. He was reading a book called The Story of Matthew Day to a number of children. The road is made up of glass, and Helman could see a label with Jam Jar 34 glinting in the sun. He encouraged his brothers to move very quickly. Helman passed plots of land in a number of odd shapes. He passed a tree with a young centaur sat outside, drawing with a look of sadness and loss on her face. What an alternative artist she seemed to be. He passed constructs of metal which seemed to have strange humming buildings about them, and black sheets facing the sun. The former had the words Mega Tim Ho emblazoned across the front, and the latter had Tori Ling etched into the side. Helman knew he needed to leave this place as soon as possible if he were to make it to Castle Tempelhof before Alberic von Corden's force reached his home. He whipped his brothers into action and sped across the town. He failed to notice the building called the Spicy Latino as he drove by. Helman would likely have stopped had he noticed the tavern that brought so much devastation to his life all those years ago. As Helman passed a sign in the centre of the village which read Hobbiton Great Hall 500 metres, he wondered whether he would be able to escape this strange stronghold and make it to Castle Tempelhof in time.